We built them to flatten cities, sink fleets, and end empires. From the flying tanks of the Eastern Front to the wooden wonders of the RAF and the single plane that dropped the sun on Japan, today we are looking at every single bomber of World War II. Which one was the true king of the skies? Let's find out. First up, the heavyweights. These are the skyline fillers, starting with the Boeing B-29 Flying Fortress, the survivor. If you needed to come home with half a tail missing, this was your plane. It wasn't the fastest or the heaviest lifter, but it was the toughest. With a 4,800-pound bomb load and 1350 caliber machine guns, the B-17 became the symbol of the daylight bombing campaign because it could absorb punishment that would disintegrate any other airframe. Next is the consolidated B-24 Liberator, the workhorse. This was the Ford to the B-17's Ferrari. It had a longer range and a heavier payload than the Fortress. However, it was ugly, hard to fly, and fragile if hit in the wing route. Pilots hated it, but the generals loved it. We built over 18,000 of them, more than any other American military aircraft in history. Then we have the Avro Lancaster, the Night Stalker. While the Americans bombed by day, the Lancaster owned the night. It featured a massive, unobstructed bomb bay that could carry the 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bomb. It was the backbone of the RAF. It lacked the heavy defensive guns of the Americans, relying on darkness for protection, but it delivered the heaviest blows of the war. Following that is the Handley Page Halifax, the second fiddle. Always overshadowed by the Lancaster, the Halifax was actually more versatile. It bombed cities, towed gliders, and dropped spies into occupied France. It was the unsung hero of the RAF. Now look at the short Stirling, the failure. This was the first British four-engine bomber, and it was a lesson in bad bureaucracy. The Air Ministry demanded it fit inside standard hangars, so designers clipped the wings. The result was that it couldn't climb above the flak. It was retired to towing gliders while the war was still raging. Moving on to the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, the sci-fi weapon. With a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled turrets, and a 350-mile-per-hour top speed, this plane was a generation ahead of everything else. It cost more to design the B-29 than to build the atomic bomb. It remains the only bomber capable of ending a war with a single mission. Across the lines, we find the Heinkel 177 Greif, the flaming coffin. This was Germany's only heavy bomber, and it was a disaster. Hitler demanded it be able to dive bomb, which is insane for a heavy bomber. The coupled engines overheated constantly. Pilots joked that 177 stood for the number of fires it started. Then there is the Petlyakov P-8, the Soviet giant. This was Stalin's vanity project. It bombed Berlin as early as 1941 to prove a point, but with only roughly 90 built, it was a ghost. And finally, for the heavyweights, the Piaggio P-108, the Mussolini Special. This was Italy's only four-engine bomber. It featured remote-control gun turrets on the outer engines, but it was complex and dangerous. Mussolini's own son, Bruno, died crashing one. Next, we move to the mediums. These planes didn't level cities, they won the war on the ground. Kicking off this list is the North American B-25 Mitchell, the celebrity. It achieved legendary status when 16 of them launched from the rolling deck of an aircraft carrier to strike the heart of Tokyo. Later versions, known as commerce destroyers, mounted a massive 75mm cannon in the nose, effectively turning the bomber into a flying artillery piece that devastated Japanese shipping lanes. Then comes the Martin B-26 Marauder, the Widowmaker. Fast, sleek, and unforgiving. It had stubby wings and a high landing speed, which killed rookies in training. But in the hands of an expert, it had the lowest combat loss rate of any U.S. bomber. We also have the Junkers Ju-88, the jack of all trades. This was the wonder weapon of the Luftwaffe. If they had a specific tactical problem, the Ju-88 was the solution. It served as a high-speed bomber, a deadly night fighter with radar antennas on the nose, and even a tank killer. With over 15,000 built, it was arguably the most versatile combat aircraft of the entire conflict. Another icon is the Heinkel 111, the blitz icon, known for its distinctive glazed greenhouse nose. It was terrifying in 1940 over London. By 1944, it was obsolete slaughter fodder, slow, poorly armed, and easy to shoot down. Next is the Dornier Du-17, the flying pencil. Designed to outrun fighters in the 1930s with its extremely thin fuselage, by the Battle of Britain, it couldn't outrun Spitfires and carried a tiny bomb load. it was quietly retired. Then we see the Vickers Wellington, the geodetic weaver, designed by Barnes-Wallis. It was built with a unique basket weave of metal called a geodetic airframe. This made it incredibly tough. Flak could punch clean holes through the fabric skin without compromising the structural integrity. It served as the primary British night bomber, taking the fight to Germany long before the heavy Lancasters arrived. Over in the Pacific, there was the Mitsubishi G4M, Betty. The flying lighter, it had incredible range, able to fly 3,700 miles. But to get that range, Japan stripped all the armor. One incendiary bullet and the fuel tanks exploded. It famously carried Admiral Yamamoto to his death. Also flying for Japan was the Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally, the Standard. This was the backbone of the Japanese Army Air Service, serving in every theater from China to the Philippines. While reliable and easy to fly, it was totally outclassed by 1943. Like most Japanese bombers, it lacked the self-sealing fuel tanks and heavy defensive firepower needed to survive against modern Allied interceptors. And from Italy, the Savoia Marchetti SM-79, the Hunchback. This was the pride of the Regia Aeronautica, with its 3 engines and a distinct hump on the fuselage. It was arguably the ugliest aircraft in the sky, but it was deadly effective. It earned a reputation as the finest land-based torpedo bomber of the war, famously skimming the waves of the Mediterranean to wreak havoc on British convoys desperately trying to resupply Malta. Now, let's look at the precision scalpels. When you need to hit a moving ship or a specific bunker, you call these guys. Starting with the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, the terror weapon. Famous for its fixed landing gear and Jericho trumpet sirens, it was psychological warfare. The siren terrified troops in Poland and France. But without air superiority, it was a sitting duck. Next is the Douglas SBD Dauntless, the hero of Midway. Pilots joked that SBD stood for slow but deadly. By 1942, it was technically obsolete. Yet, in one single miraculous afternoon at the Battle of Midway, Dauntless squadrons caught the Japanese fleet off guard. In the span of just 5 minutes, they fatally bombed 4 enemy aircraft carriers, turning the tide of the entire Pacific War. Following that is the Grumman TBF Avenger. The Brute, this was the heaviest single-engine aircraft of the war. Built like a flying tank to absorb punishment that would shred lesser planes. Carrying a massive 2,000-pound torpedo, it replaced the coffin-like Devastator. It became legendary for its survivability. In fact, future President George H.W.H. Bush famously survived being shot down and won over the Pacific. Then we have the Douglas A-20 Havoc, the low-level Raider. Known as the Boston and RAF service, this aircraft was fast, agile, and universally loved by its crews for its ease of handling. It was a true pilot's airplane. The US, British, and especially the Soviet Air Force used it to lethal effect, skimming the treetops to surprise enemy columns and dropping parachute bombs before the flak gunners even knew they were there. A true legend is the de Havilland Mosquito, the wooden wonder. Made of plywood and balsa, it was faster than most fighters. It flew so fast it didn't need defensive guns. It could drop a bomb through a specific window of the Gestapo headquarters, a masterpiece of engineering. Next up is the Aichi D-3A Val, the Pearl Harbor Killer. With its fixed landing gear and large wheel covers, it looked ancient even for 1941. But do not let the retro aesthetics fool you. These Imperial Navy pilots were elite, achieving a terrifying 80% hit rate during the early war raids. In fact, the Val sank more Allied warships than any other Axis aircraft in history, proving that lethality isn't always about top speed. Alongside it flew the Nakajima B-5N Kate, the Torpedo Master. In 1941, this was the best torpedo bomber on Earth, far superior to the American Devastator. With a 3-man crew and exceptional range, it was the spear tip of the Imperial Navy. It famously carried the specially modified Type 91 torpedoes that could run in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor. These machines executed a perfect surprise attack that decimated the U.S. Pacific Fleet, proving that the age of the battleship was over. And of course, the Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik, the flying tank, not a traditional bomber, but a ground attacker with a heavily armored bathtub for the pilot. We built 36,000 of them, the most produced combat aircraft in history. Stalin said the Red Army needed the Il-2 like air and bread. Finally, we arrive at the technological marvels, the weapons that arrived too late to save the Axis, but changed the future. First is the Arado R234 Blitz, the first jet bomber. This was the harbinger of the modern age. With its twin-jet engines and a top speed of 460 miles per hour, it was functionally untouchable in level flight. No Allied fighter could catch it during a reconnaissance run over Normandy, proving once and for all that the age of the propeller was over. Then there is the Messerschmitt Me-262 bomber variant, the What If, the world's first jet fighter modified to carry bombs. Hitler insisted this air superiority fighter be used as a bomber. This order ruined its potential and saved thousands of Allied bomber crews. And lastly, the Yokosuka MXY-7 Ohka, the Desperation. A rocket-powered, human-guided suicide glider dropped from a bomber. It hit speeds of 600 miles per hour, a terrifying, desperate weapon that thankfully saw limited success. From the wooden Mosquito to the atomic B-29, that is the complete roster of destruction. These machines were more than just metal and canvas. They represented the bridge between the old world of biplanes and the terrifying new age of jet propulsion and nuclear power. We have covered every major bomber that defined the Second World War, but the debate over which one was the greatest still rages on. Now, I have a difficult question for you in the comments. If you received your draft notice in 1944, which sheet are you taking? Are you trusting your life to the rugged armor and heavy guns of the B-17 Flying Fortress? Or are you betting everything on the sheer speed of the de Havilland Mosquito? Or perhaps you would choose the raw power of the Lancaster? Let me know your pick and why in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into aviation history, consider liking this video as it helps us feed the algorithm. And if you want to see the machines that hunted these bombers down, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming ranking of every fighter plane of World War II. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.